The Komodo dragon is not, in the deepest sense, an Indonesian animal. The oldest bones we have of this exact species were not lifted out of Flores or Komodo or any island in the Lesser Sunda chain. They were lifted out of eastern Australia, and they are almost 4 million years old. The dragon did not begin here. It ended here. Start with the animal as it stands today. A large male runs about 10 feet from snout to tail tip, longer than most sofas. A typical wild adult weighs around 150 pounds, and the heaviest ever verified came in at 366. Half of that length is tail. The teeth are curved, serrated, and replaced continuously through life, closer to the teeth of a shark than to anything else that walks on land. For most of the last century, the story of how this animal kills was told the same way in every documentary and every guidebook on the shelf. The bite was said to be filthy. Bacteria in the saliva infected the wound, and the prey died days later of blood poisoning. That story has been retired. In 2009, a research team put a dragon through a medical scanner and found something nobody had thought to look for: venom glands. Real ones, sitting in the lower jaw, opening between the teeth, producing compounds that stop blood from clotting and drive blood pressure down toward shock. So the weapon is a grip, a pull, and a chemical, not a dirty mouth. The bacteria living in a dragon's mouth turn out to be unremarkable, roughly what you would find in any carnivore that eats carrion. Now the question that brought you here. Where does this animal actually live? The honest answer is smaller than almost anyone expects. 4 islands hold confirmed breeding populations, and all 4 sit inside Komodo National Park. Komodo itself, Rinca just to the east, and 2 much smaller ones, Gili Motang and Nusa Kode, each holding fewer than 100 animals. Beyond the park boundary there is one more place, the western and northern coast of Flores, a long island about the size of Connecticut, home to nearly 2 million people. The dragons there hold on in scattered fragments, cut off from each other and from the island populations. Add every one of them together, and the wild total sits somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 animals. Fewer than 1,500 of those are breeding adults. That is, the entire species. You will still find the figure 5,700 in circulation, including on the World Heritage listing for the park. That number came out of surveys in the 1990s, and it has not been true for a long time. The 2 small populations are the fragile ones. Gili Motang's dragons have been separated long enough for it to show in their genes, partly cut off from Komodo and Rinca, which, on a group that small, stacks the risk of inbreeding on top of every other risk they already carry. For decades, the explanation ran in one direction. The animal is enormous, it lives on islands, and islands are famous for building giants. Strand a modest lizard, remove its competition, give it a few million years, and it swells into something out of a legend. Island gigantism, tidy, memorable, and printed in almost every account of this animal ever written. Then a team of paleontologists spent 3 years digging in eastern Australia and pulled fossil after fossil out of Queensland. Jawbones, limb bones, skull fragments, dated from 300,000 years old to nearly 4 million. When they set those bones beside the skeleton of a living Komodo dragon, the bones were not merely similar, they were the same animal. The paper came out in 2009, under a title that reads more like an elegy than a study: Dragon's Paradise Lost. Its conclusion broke the tidy idea in half. The Komodo dragon did not evolve in Indonesia. It evolved in Australia, and then it went west. And the bones were not the only witness. When geneticists compared living monitor lizards against each other, the Komodo dragon did not fall in beside anything Asian. It lands inside the Australian branch of the family, among goannas like the parenti of the central deserts and the lace monitor of the eastern forests. Exactly which of them is the closest cousin is still argued, and the fossils are too incomplete to settle it. What is not argued is the direction. The dragon's relatives lie south and east of it, never west.
Buried inside that finding is a detail that does more damage to the old story than the location does. If island isolation had inflated this animal, its body size should climb through the fossil record. It does not. Measured against the bones recovered on Flores, the Komodo dragon has held roughly the same proportions for the last 900,000 years. It did not become a giant on these islands. It arrived as one. And it was not even the biggest in the family. Australia at the time held a monitor lizard called Megalania, something close to 16 feet long, the largest land lizard the world has ever produced. The two of them shared a continent. Set beside that animal, the creature we now call the largest lizard alive was the smaller of the pair.
Which raises an obvious problem. If the dragon walked out of Australia, how did it end up stranded on islands? It swims well enough over short distances, and that is usually where the explanation stops. The genetics tell a different story. First, the setting. These islands sit inside a zone biologists call Wallacea, a scatter of land caught at the join of two continental plates, where Asian and Australian wildlife overlap, and neither side ever takes the place over. It is a region of short distances and deep water, and the deep water is the part that matters. Even at the lowest sea levels, some of those channels never closed. Tracking studies, translocation experiments, mark and recapture work, and gene flow analysis all point the same way. Komodo dragons barely move. Individuals often live and die without ever leaving the valley they were born in, even when the next valley over holds more prey. The capacity for long-distance travel is there in the body. The behavior is not. So the crossings were not made by swimming. They were made on foot, during the long stretches when the sea stood lower, and these islands were not yet islands. Flores and Rinca were joined until roughly 10,000 years ago. Girimotang and Nusa Kode were connected more than once. Then the ice melted, the water came up, the bridges went under, and the animals on either side simply stayed where they were standing. Every population you can visit today is a group that got stranded, and then declined to leave. Now, turn the question you arrived with upside down. If this family began in Australia and thrived there, the puzzle is not why Komodo dragons are only in Indonesia. The puzzle is why they are nowhere else. Giant monitor lizards used to be ordinary. They ranged across Australia through the islands of Wallacea and as far west as Java. Fossils of the group have come out of Timor, Flores, Java, and India. For millions of years, a lizard of this size was simply part of the furniture across an enormous stretch of the world. Then, region by region, they went. Megalania vanished from Australia somewhere around 40,000 years ago, though the exact date is still argued. The Timor giants went. The Java giants went. The Australian dragons went. What survives on Komodo and Rinca is not a species that conquered an island. It is the last branch of a family that lost everywhere else. The contraction did not stop when the fossil record did. It is still running. 2,000 years ago, there were dragons in the highlands of western Flores. We know because their bones sit in a cave called Liang Bua, the same cave that gave up the remains of a small human species that once shared these islands with them. There are no dragons in those highlands now. They hold on along the coast and nowhere above it. That cave holds one more thing worth sitting with. Work published this year found dragon tooth marks scored across the bones of the elephants those early humans were eating, concentrated on the shoulders and the hips, the parts a predator takes first. The reading that follows is uncomfortable and probably correct. The small humans of Flores were not hunting those animals down. They were finishing what the dragons had already opened. Padar is the clearest case and the most recent. It is the third largest island in the national park, and it had dragons within living memory. Through the middle of the 20th century, the deer on Padar were hunted out. The dragons had nothing left to eat. The last confirmed sighting was in the late 1970s. The habitat is still there, still suitable, still empty. And because these animals will not disperse, nothing has walked back in. In 2021, the species was moved from vulnerable to endangered. The reasons listed were not hunters. They were prey loss, land clearing, and rising seas, because most of the ground the dragon has left is low, coastal, and getting smaller. So when someone asks why Komodo dragons live only in Indonesia, the usual answer is that this is simply where they came from. It is the wrong way round. This is not their homeland. It is their last address. The islands did not build the dragon. The islands are only the place where the world ran out of room for it last. Before today, what did you think the answer was? Islands gigantism, the way most of us were taught it, or something else? Leave it in the comments, because almost everyone gets this one wrong in exactly the same direction. Every creature in this story belonged to someone, a parent, a mate, a line that ran back millions of years before any of us arrived to name it. Most of that line is gone now, and what is left of it stands on 4 islands and 1 stretch of coast. Look after the ones who are yours. From Lupinski Wildscape, where nature tells its story.